Have you ever wondered why your research seemed to move effortlessly in graduate school, only to stall out once you became a professor? Have you been recently hired or are looking to go on the market soon and want to know how your research will be a part of your job? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we explore one of the biggest transitions in an academic career, starting a research agenda as a new professor. While new faculty are often hired for their potential, they quickly find themselves balancing teaching, service, advising, and the demands of a new institutional culture. We examine why building a sustainable scholarly life requires intentionality, clarity, and an honest understanding of the institution where you work. So let's dive in. So whenever I got my job here at the University of Northern Iowa, I think I, like many of you that are out on the market now, or perhaps are going out on the market, might relate to this, which is to say, I really didn't care where I ended up as long as someone would pay me, because at that point, I had gone straight through my programs, I had my student debt, and I needed a job in order to put a roof over my head and afford food, just the little things. So I did not have on my bingo card that I would end up in Iowa. I didn't really know where I wanted to be, but at the time I really didn't care. I just needed a job. And the job that I applied for was open and I ended up getting it. And I was very lucky to do so. And I've been very fortunate to be in a great university and with great colleagues. But whenever I was going through the process of getting hired, I gave the typical interview presentations. And from that, talked about my research and my research trajectory, which at this university was important. In my first year, I was still working on finishing my dissertation, so didn't really have a research agenda. I was just trying to finish my disc because I knew I wanted to keep my job. So it wasn't really until my second year that I really started to think about, okay, now I've got some room to breathe. I'm not in this new job trying to figure out all these new things. I'm not working on my dissertation. I'm now kind of coming into my own as a person who will be contributing to scholarship. So what does that mean? What do I want to do? And it took a while to figure out how am I going to fit this on my already very full plate, because whenever I had gotten hired, the institution was doing very well. We had just hired 3 other people in my department at the same time. There was a lot of changes going on. So a lot of opportunities for service, which is, a funny way of saying that, opportunities for service, as if we are all looking for those. In my first 2 or 3 years at my institution, I had probably 9 different preps. And so I was teaching a lot of different classes. I was on a lot of different committees. I was doing a lot of stuff, and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to put my research into here. And so I thought, this might be something that would be helpful for many of you. And in fact, one of you all talked to me a little bit about this exact same problem. So I thought that I would do an episode on it and try to give some advice on how to find the type of job that's going to fit your scholarly trajectory, how then once you get that job, you're going to fit your research productivity into that institutional culture, and eventually how you might end up needing to change yourself if you want to end up leaving that institution. So let's dive in. Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea. So before I get into the more specific issues that arise whenever you're trying to negotiate how to fit your research into your scholarly job, I want to take a step back and talk about what I see as the sort of overall problem. And I think the biggest problem is that for most of us, whenever we're going through doctoral programs, those are at research-intensive R1 universities. And as a result, the faculty that we are around the most typically are very publication-driven, they're grant-seeking, they're prestige-oriented, and they're highly specialized, right? A lot of them are on the cutting edge of their field. They have access to resources that most of us that are at more teaching-oriented universities or institutions do not have as it relates to lab costs or grant funding or research support from graduate students, any of those things that are found in relative abundance at these more research-intensive universities. They are not found at more teaching-oriented universities. As a result, you're spending your 2, 3, 4, 5 years in this institutional culture, and you might think to yourself that this is what it means to be a professor, is to have this type of research-first identity and this very publication or grant-driven mindset. The truth of the matter, though, is that if you look at like the Carnegie Institute that does this type of classification, less than 200 universities or colleges are considered R1, which is defined as having a clear threshold of $50 million in total research spending and 70 research doctorates awarded annually. But even if you're in an R2 or R3, there's about 350 universities or colleges that are R2 or R3. So overall, again, 500 universities that are some sort of research intensive. The other 3,500 institutions in the United States are not research intensive. All that is to say is that unless you are being very, very explicit and intentional about the type of job that you want to have as a researcher, the vast majority of us, whenever we're hired, we are going to be hired in some type of institution that is more teaching oriented. That might be a teaching oriented master's terminal, public university, might be a community college, small liberal arts college, private college. There are all sorts of institutions that are out there where research is not the most important part of your job. And yet, the vast majority of the socialization that you have gotten from professors for the past 3, 4, 5 years has been from this more rare example of what the professorate is. Added to that burden is the fact that a lot of those professors think that their job is either A, what all professors should be like, or B, if you're not that, then you're somehow a failure. I have a colleague who, whenever she got her doctorate and she went to teach at a teaching university, her advisor told her to her face that she was wasting her potential and her degree. And I've just got to say, that's nonsense, right? The most impact that higher education has is through teaching. Yes, we have a lot of impact through our research. Yes, we have a lot of impact through our service, but we have the chance to touch the lives of hundreds of students every semester. And over the course of your lifetime, you will have much more direct effect on students than you will through almost anything that you will have written or published. All that being said, because of this culture that we get socialized into within our doctoral programs, we do ourselves a disservice in our job talks and in our expectations in our jobs, and it ends up biting us in the butt. So let's talk then about the specific problems that I see whenever folks don't have a good alignment between what they want out of their job and what they actually think that their job is going to be. Okay. So first off, I think a lot of new professors, they get their job and quickly find out that they don't really have time for research, that they overestimate how much research time that they'll have. And again, if you think about this in terms of the faculty that you see in your doctoral program, most of them are on 1-1 or 2-2 loads, which means that they teach one class a semester or 2 classes a semester, or some combination thereof. Some of them may be a little bit less, but probably no more than a 2-2 load. So if you go into a more teaching-oriented university, you might have a higher teaching threshold than that. At my university, for example, we teach on 3-3 loads. If you teach at a community college, you're probably on a 5-5 or a 6-6 load. And that's not even considering things like teaching on overload, where you teach an extra class for extra pay during the semester, or summer classes, or any of those other things. So you can quickly find yourself just not having a lot of time for your research, because in order for you to do even an adequate job of teaching, which is, bare minimum, being able to lecture coherently on that week's content and being able to grade multiple choice quizzes and tests, even that is going to become burdensome if you're teaching 5, 6, 7 classes. And so, again, a lot of folks, they overestimate how much research time that they'll have because they don't really account for the time that they're going to be using to teach. The second way that they overestimate how much research time that they'll have is by underestimating how much service that they have to do. Now, I will say that if you are a faculty member and you are in your first 3 years of your job, your department head should be jealously guarding your time and making sure that you are not being put on a slew of service obligations, because that is not conducive to your long-term career prospects. The only service that you should be doing in your first 3 years are service opportunities that are either very minimal for your department or are very major but have a output and a compensation that is a part of it. So for example, redoing the outcomes for the general education core for your university. You should only be doing that type of service because A, that's a really good way of you getting into contact with other folks across campus. B, that's going to have a tangible output that you can then point to in your CV and in your job talks in the future. And C, that should be compensated because a committee of that size and doing that important of work should be compensated. If those three things are not met, you don't do it, right? Because you need to be focusing on getting your preps ready for your classes that you're teaching that are all new. You need to get your research off the ground. And again, your chair should be helping you navigate and shielding you from bad service obligations. And I mean, I'll just say, just in general, like faculty are notorious for bemoaning how much service that we have, and at the same time, assigning ourselves just a Sisyphean amount of service to ourselves at all opportunities. Just as an example, we have learning outcomes for all the classes that we teach in our department. Here, it was decided that we need to go through all of those courses and go over all of those learning outcomes again and make sure that we were all in agreement on every learning outcome that was in every class. And if we didn't agree on things, then we had to hash that out and figure out, well, we're going to use this word or that word. And did we need 4 outcomes or 5 outcomes? And oh, well, was that verb the right verb to use? And my God, what torture. Just absolute torture. And never has more energy been expended than whenever the stakes are so low. Things like that, as a new professor, avoid it like the plague. Those are the things that you should not be doing and that your department head should be shielding you from. But even good service is just more than what you've been doing up to this point because you have not had that obligation as a doctoral student. The third problem that I see is that a lot of folks assume that publication and research is going to be the primary metric by which they are hired and by which they are rewarded at their job. So first off, it is important for you to recognize that different institutions are looking for different things in a professor. If I apply to a community college that has a 5.5 or 6.6 teaching load, they probably don't even think of research as being an important part of your job. They might actually even think that you doing research is antithetical to you doing a good job teaching, that every moment that you spent on research, you should have instead been using that time to do a better job teaching. Now, you can disagree with that if you want to. You can say, well, I can do both of those things. Cool. I'm just telling you that in more teaching-oriented institutions, if you go into a job talk and you're like, hey, look at all the things that I've published and here's all the work that I'm trying to do and here's all the questions that I'm trying to answer. And they're like, dude, we just want you to teach 6 sections of the general ed course that's in our department. That's what they want. They don't care about what your research is. And in fact, it might end up hurting you. On the other hand, right, if you go to a job talk and it's for a more research-oriented position and you're like, here's how I make connections with students and here's all the cool, innovative pedagogical techniques that I use and here's how I get all of this engagement and here's why my teaching evals are so high. They don't care about that. What they want to know is, are you going to publish like a machine and are you going to get grants that are going to help fund everything in the department? That's what they're worried about. So you need to be thinking to yourself, what kind of profile do I want to have at the end of my time in my doctoral program? So that way, whenever I go out on the job market, I can eloquently speak to what it is that they are looking for. Now, whenever I say this to clients, of course, what a lot of them say is, well, I want something where I can kind of do both of those things. I want to do research and teach. Cool. Yeah, everyone does, man. The thing is that there are going to be more institutions that are going to put more of an emphasis on teaching than there are going to be institutions that put an emphasis on research. Now, that's a blanket statement. There's probably, I'm sure, a million caveats to that. But by and large, if you look at just the 4,000 institutions across the United States, and that's not even considering all the institutions across the world, but just in the United States, again, only 550 of those are considered research intensive. The other 3,500 of them are some level of teaching oriented. So if you want to play the numbers and you want to have a job, you need to be able to speak eloquently about the relationship between your teaching and your research. The final thing that I see is that whenever people are in their jobs, they think that they're failing if they're not publishing enough in their job. And again, this is a matter of what kind of institution that you're in. Because if I'm in a small liberal arts private college, again, I'm teaching a 4.4 or 5.5. I'm supposed to be very invested in students and I'm doing a lot of research. That might be seen by your administration and by your peers as, hey, look, there's a person who's doing a lot of research. They bring that into the classroom. Here's how it informs their practice. And if you do that, and you make that argument in your materials and you show that in your teaching, then good on you. But the vast majority of people are not going to do that. And instead, what their administration and their colleagues are going to say is that person's publishing a whole lot because they want a different job and they're going to bounce as soon as they can. And that might even be true. You might be looking for a research-oriented job and you might be doing that. But if so, make sure that you're doing that eyes wide open. Know that other folks might have this impression of you, whether you intend it or not, and that can have repercussions for the type of job that you have. That being said, again, if you are in a job and you want to move to a more research-intensive type of college, then you're going to have to show how you are both competent in the job that you already had, and now that you can perform to the level of a more research-intensive institution. So how do you start then your research profile as a new professor? So I've got 3 different solutions for you. First off, whenever you get your job, you should define a 3-year research agenda. You need to identify the big projects that you want to accomplish, and you need to make sure that you are protecting a block of time that is non-negotiable, that you are able to work on it. Now, I say a block of time, and I don't give you a time allotment for that. 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour. I don't give you that because that amount of time should be commensurate with what type of research profile that you're expected to have as a professor or that you want to have if you are currently in a job but you want a more research-intensive position. So for example, we are technically all on 4.4s and then given a release to make it us a 3.3. So if that's the case, well, how much time do I spend on my classes? So for every 3-hour class, I'm spending 3 hours in that class and 3 hours outside of class in order to do grading, prep, and all that stuff. Okay, so that's 18 hours of my 40-hour work week is just on teaching. So in that case, minimally, I should be devoting 6 hours a week to my research, right? Because if I'm getting one course release, technically, in order to pursue research, then 6 hours a week, what I should be spending on my research, whether that's reading, editing, finding grants, whatever it might be. So that's 24 hours of my 40-hour work week, and then 16 hours of all the other stuff I have to do, all the meetings that I attend, emails that I have to write, graduate students that I advise, all the other stuff that I do in my 40-hour. And you might think to yourself, well, what if you work more than 40 hours a week? Cool. I mean, that's choice. It would not be a choice that I would recommend. What the research bears out is that people who work more than that, they're actually very quickly diminishing returns after working more than 40 hours a week. And that the reason that you're working 60 hours is because you're actually doing about 10 hours worth of work, but you have to take 20 hours to do it because you have such diminishing returns at that point. So I would say it is more important for you to have a consistent 40-hour work that you go to the office or you go to your writing hovel or wherever it is that you go, that you have a routine and that you execute 40 hours a week of work every week, right? Anyway, I'll have an episode on that some other time. But so for me, then I have 6 hours of research that I have to do. I need to protect that like I would a class, right? If someone were to email me and say, hey, could you meet at 10 o'clock on Monday? I wouldn't say, well, I've got a class, but sure, I guess I can just cancel class and have this meeting with you. I would never do that because there's 30 students in that class. They need to be taken care of. In the same way, my research needs to be taken care of. And so I have a block of time that I have for that research, and I don't deviate from that. And I don't let other people get in the way of that time that I have set. The other thing that is important here is that you are identifying the big question or the big project or the overarching trajectory that you want to have over the course of this 3 years. I think that for a lot of folks, once they kind of get into the groove of things, they start getting asked to do one-off essays from a friend, or, hey, could you submit a chapter to this? Or, hey, would you like to co-author this thing? And next thing you know, you're juggling just an absolute ton of projects. And none of those things are really what you're trying to get at, but they're safe and they're easy and they help pad your CV and all that stuff, right? But one of my colleagues said, and I think that it's very true, that the enemy of big accomplishments is being distracted by small achievements, right? It's not even that you're distracted by stupid things. It's not like you're eating potato chips and playing video games every day, but you're being distracted by small achievements whenever you could be saving that energy and accomplishing big things. So first thing, have that 3-year schedule and protect that weekly time that is a part of that schedule. Second thing, is to build a workflow. So if you have this 6 hours, let's just say, a week that you should be able to devote to your research, what a lot of people look at that and they go, well, there's no way that I could find 6 hours in my day in which I could do research. Cool. Yeah, most of us don't have 6 hours of uninterrupted time every week in order for us to do our research. Instead, you need to find 2 days of 3 hours or 3 days of 2 hours or some combination thereof. Use the math however you want to in order for you to build a sustainable workflow that allows you to move from one project in the writing to the next. So that might be, this week I'm going to spend every one of these days reading literature and taking notes. And then next week, every one of those 2-hour blocks is going to be me writing one paragraph or one page or whatever it might be. And so by having a set goal for that writing time, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to go to Panera and write for 2 hours. Well, how much writing are you going to do? Are you going to do 300 words of writing? Are you going to do 600 words of writing? Are you going to read a whole bunch? Are you going to take notes? Like, what are you going to accomplish in that time? And for a lot of folks, they get into that time and then they just futz it away because they haven't really allocated how that time is supposed to be spent. And so making sure that you're building a workflow across the times that you have for your research is going to be important. The third thing that you need to do is you need to figure out, what is your research professional identity? Are you a researcher? Is that your first thing that you're going to talk about? Because for most doc students, whenever I ask them, what is it that you do? Almost all of them will say, here are the things that I'm researching right now. Not what I'm teaching, not the impact that I hope to have through my service, not the communities that I hope to serve. Almost all of them start off with their research as being their primary identity. And again, that's not a problem necessarily. Certainly that's how you're being socialized in your program, and that might be the type of program that you want to be in and might want to lead as a career. But if that's not you, then that doesn't need to be the way that you talk about yourself. You can talk about yourself as a teacher first. You can talk about yourself as a teacher whose research informs your teaching practice. Or you can talk about yourself as a community-oriented service scholar. There are so many ways that you can talk about yourself and position yourself both on the job market and once you have a job that you develop as an identity that will lead you either to professional success within your institution or professional success in a different institution whenever you apply for jobs at other places. Overall, I think what's important is that as you're looking to the job market, it's important for you to recognize that research, that so much of your time over the past 3, 4, 5 years in your doctoral program has really been preparing you to be a good researcher, and probably far less has been devoted to your professional development as a teacher, as a person of service for your community or for your university, or for a whole host of other functions that professors have other than just research. And it is in your best interest now to start recognizing what those things are for your particular fields and disciplines, figuring out which one of those things you want to do and which ones you don't, and then to develop your identity and your CV in such a way as to secure a job that allows you to do that for the first part of your career. And then once you get a job, helps you develop the type of career trajectory that you want to have over the course of your life. And the last thing that I'll say is that you don't have to have the same type of career for your entire job. Here I am, I'm doing a podcast. That was not on my bingo card whenever I got out of my doctorate program. It wasn't my bingo card whenever I got tenure. And yet here I am, I'm having fun doing it, meeting new people, talking about things that I hope are helpful for you all, and hopefully having some sort of an impact. But that was not the type of scholar that I saw myself even 5 or 6 years ago. And so to that end, just remember that the type of scholar that you are right out of your doctoral program might not be the same type of scholar that you are as you go on the job market or once you get a job. And then once you get a job, over the next 5, 10, 15, 35 years of your career, you might have a lot of changes over the types of things that interest you, the types of things that are expected of you, and the types of things that you want or don't want to do but still have to do. And that's okay. But it's important for you to recognize that and to be able to communicate to others around you in your department and in your university and to potential employers about what kind of person that you want to be and the trajectory that you see for yourself, and then being able to meet that. Okay. So thank you so much for listening. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you would give a 5-star review to the podcast, write a little something nice about it. That is incredibly important to the algorithm gods. If you have topics that you would like for me to address in a podcast episode, reach out to me. Let me know about that. If you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, connect with me on LinkedIn or through my email. I'm happy to talk about that with you and see if there might be an opportunity to talk about a idea that you might have, an upcoming book that you have coming out, or anything else that you think might be of interest to the other listeners on this podcast. Okay? So thank you so much, and I will see you in next week's episode. Hey, co-authors. What's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.